Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni mili wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Tell your kids' teachers, their principal, their librarian, and also please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, wherever you find your podcasts. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Lucas and the Game of Chance, a thrilling middle grade novel written by Anthony L. Manna. It is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read. While Lucas is playing his flute at the seawall one day, he befriends a mysterious talking dancing snake that rewards him with fortune and favor. Some years later, tempted by greed and pride, Lucas loses all of his riches and his family. He now must set off on a treacherous journey through a frightening forest filled with suspense and strange creatures. To find Destiny, her son, Ilion, the sun, her daughter, Luna, the moon. These celestial guardians will surely allow him to reverse his misfortune, restore his honor, and win back all that he loves and treasures. Won't they? This is a reimagined Greek folk tale, Lucas in the Game of Chance. It's illuminated with dramatic and evocative pen and ink drawings that provide an ideal backdrop for the dark intrigue that fills this haunting story of human struggle, courage, and resilience. You and your kids are going to love it. Lucas and the Game of Chance by Anthony L. Manna. It is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Mr. Thoughtful Gets Into Trouble. Great new children's book from Christopher Arsenault. Join Mr. Thoughtful on an exhilarating voyage through the wondrous world of thoughts and emotions. Discover the magic of kindness and positivity as Mr. Thoughtful embarks on an adventure that not only sparks creativity, but also nurtures children's self-esteem, leaving young minds inspired and empowered. You are going to love meeting Mr. Thoughtful. He is your friendly guide through the world of thoughts and kindness. And you and your kids will both love joining in his adventure and discovering the power of positive thinking and the joy of choosing kindness over chaos. We love this book. You'll love it too. It's Mr. Thoughtful Gets Into Trouble by Christopher Arsenault. Join us right now from the beautiful southern area of Florida. Our guests are here today to celebrate their brand new middle grade fantasy. First, please welcome Rob Long. Rob, how are you?
I'm great. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. And Rob is joined by his co-author, Andrew Dolberg. Hey, Andrew, how's it going?
Hey, Jedley. Thanks so much for having us on.
Delighted to have you on. Andrew, why don't we start with you? Tell us all about the great weather diviner, the untold origin of Punxsutawney Phil.
Sure. So like the title would indicate, this is the untold origin of Punxsutawney Phil. We wanted to come up with a fun, action-packed story that highlights this incredible character that people everywhere know and love as the groundhog that controls or predicts the weather. Rob grew up in Punxsutawney, and the idea of Groundhog Day as something that has a much larger backstory that we can build a fantasy world around was really exciting to us. And so the book is very much a fantasy. It is an anthropomorphic world filled with all animals, and Junior, the groundhog, has to go on an adventure to both save his town and figure out why nature has turned on his people. And so it becomes sort of an allegory for what we need to do to protect the environment over the course of this really action-packed story.
Wow. So, Rob, growing up in Punxsutawney, I've actually visited Punxsutawney. I don't know if I was just driving through or if I had a performance at a school or stayed at a Holiday Inn. I don't know, but I do know I was there, and I know that because it was, you go through these towns and most of them don't register, but Punxsutawney absolutely registered. What was it like growing up in that little town in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Not many towns of less than 6,000 in Western PA really stand out. So I'm glad that it made an impression. It was cool growing up there. It's a totally different vibe than where I live now in Florida. It's an extremely small town. It's kind of remote. The closest city is Pittsburgh, and it's about 2.5 hours away. But I tell you, the Punxsutawney Phil and that custom, which has been going on for like 200 years, really, in a way, does define the town. We usually get the day off of school for it. We have the groundhog as our mascot. It's a really big deal there, and people are really proud of it. And, that it really turned into a cultural phenomenon in the 90s. It had always been a thing in Punxsutawney, but in the 90s when the Groundhog's Day movie, the Bill Murray movie came out, it really blew up. And that's when tens of thousands of people started showing up at Gobbler's Knob on Groundhog Day. And now I think they still get roughly 10 to 20,000 every year. But back in the 90s, it was like 30, 40, 50,000 people. It got insane. But no, it was pretty cool growing up there. A very outdoorsy sort of area. I spent a lot of time outside, a lot of time in the woods. It's really a town kind of surrounded by woods out in the wilderness. And we kind of reflect that in the book a little, but it's obviously a fictionalized version of the town, but it's very much surrounded by the forest, and kind of because of that, the characters are very sheltered and they don't know what's going on in the rest of the world until they leave their town.
Yeah. Before we get back to the book, I need to ask you, Rob, what was your reaction when the folks in Staten Island tried to present this fake groundhog?
Imposter. We joke about that a lot. It's kind of a running joke in Punxsutawney, actually. And there's actually a whole bunch of different mascots now. Like, there's other groundhogs. There's like an armadillo in Texas. It predicts about. There's all kinds of characters. It's really funny. But Staten Island Chuck, I think is what they call him. He's like the most famous. But I think he died recently. I don't know.
I think a politician dropped him and killed him.
Something like that. Didn't he bite the mayor of New York at one point?
Yeah.
There's all these stories. It is kind of, I think, a friendly competition. I don't know if there's actually been any real litigation or anything about it. I don't think there has been, but it's kind of always been a running joke. Punxsutawney Phil is the undisputed, first and king of the weather predicting animals. I will say that. I don't think anyone would really challenge that.
Absolutely.
We also, because of Staten Island Chuck, Rob and I have joked a lot about how we can incorporate a imposter groundhog into this universe that we've created. And so, not to give you any spoilers, but it's a possibility a Staten Island Chuck lookalike pops up in a future book.
I love that.
Yeah, I've talked about that a lot.
Well, Andrew, how did this story come about? Did you set out to write a novel together, or were you just kind of, a couple of bros out at the pub sharing a pint or two and came up with the idea?
So what's really great about this process is that Rob and I are best friends going back a long time. And over COVID, we really had trouble staying connected, just like everyone did. But we would go over to each other's houses and really sit on each other's patios and watch movies and TV shows together. And that was how we really stayed connected. Once every couple of weeks, we would go to each other's houses and do that in a safe way outside. And after a few months of the lockdown, Rob reached out and told me that the way that he had stayed sane during the COVID lockdowns was to write a short story novella reimagining Punxsutawney Phil and the Groundhog Day tradition. So he sent me this short story, and I remember reading it in just a couple hours, and I absolutely loved it. It was very much the beginning of what our book became, and it was a fantasy world starring Punxsutawney Phil, or one of his descendants, going on this adventure. I loved it so much because it reminded me of my childhood days, especially in my first grade classroom, my teacher teaching us about Groundhog Day and us watching the groundhog on TV and all of that. And it reminded me so much of that fond, nostalgic memory. And so I told Rob I really thought there was something here, and that's when we started working on the novel in earnest. And so we took a lot of our favorite parts of the original novella out, outlined a much longer story, and then rooted it in this message about climate change and protecting the environment that has become the central theme of the story. And so it really started as Rob's idea that we were able to work on collaboratively to turn it into this much larger novel. I don't think that either of us ever had a dream of becoming an author. Rob and I have both had a few different careers in different spaces, and we still do a lot on the side. But I don't think that becoming an author was ever in the cards for us until this kind of came about organically. And it was really fun to go back and forth, building these ideas out and eventually co-writing this book where we would put together chapters and the characters and all of that together as a team.
Rob, how was it? How was the writing process, especially since this began as kind of your brainchild? Was it easy for you to kind of let go of things and allow Andrew to, contribute and make some changes and take things in a way that you didn't foresee initially?
It was actually kind of a godsend when Andrew saw the potential in it and agreed to help me. I kind of went to him first it was very daunting to even show it to him because I didn't want him to think I was like a crazy person. I'd never written anything creative before, and so I had no confidence in what I was doing. I didn't even tell people I was working on this thing, and it's kind of a weird idea. And so I'm like, hey man, you want to read this weird thing I did? And, and then he came back and was really positive, saw the potential in it. And I'd really sent it to him because I was kind of at an impasse with it. I didn't know how to make it into what I really wanted it to be. And Andrew is far more organized than I am. And he helped map the whole thing out. He's like, this is great, but we got to add a whole bunch of meat in the middle to it and kind of rethink the ending. We probably need another main character here. It really started prescribing what the book needed to really be a book instead of just this almost half story that I'd written. And so actually having Andrew in the mix was perfect. And then from there, we were able to just kind of fill in the blanks. Once we had outlined, kind of the skeleton of a good story, from there, we really just got a lot of momentum and we really started to come up with great ideas. And this went through a lot of revisions. We have we had a bunch of different Google Docs that we would share back and forth. This went through revision after revision after revision. And we finally, it took us about 2.5 years, came up with something that we were really proud of. And, we got really lucky with, getting published right away.
Yeah. Andrew, one of the things that I'm always amazed at, I have a hard enough time when I'm reading a sci-fi or a fantasy book, keeping the kind of laws of that universe straight in my own mind as a reader, as a writer, and as a creator. How are you keeping those things straight in your own thinking so that you're not getting to chapter 15 and thinking, oh, I want to do this, and then thinking, oh man, but I said in chapter 9 we couldn't do stuff like that?
I'm really happy you brought that up because it is the topic that Rob and I have discussed the most. After we went over the short story, the first time, we did not put pen to paper for probably 6 months after that. All that we did is we would have phone calls, we would get together multiple times a week and just talk about this universe that we wanted to create. Rob and I both love all of the epic fantasies, like The Lord of the Rings and The Chronicles of Narnia and TV shows that go on those same themes, right? Game of Thrones, Avatar The Last Airbender, these big universes that have not only characters that are unique, but a history and a politics and a culture to them that's built out in a way that you feel this is a real universe. And that's what we wanted to do. So in these hours and hours, hundreds of hours of conversations that Rob and I had about the universe, we talked about all of that. We know so much more about this universe on a continent that we call Erda than the reader does right now. And that gives us not only avenues to different stories that we're going to branch out to, but also it was very easy once we knew all of that information to write a story within this universe based on how we know it already works. And so you asked the question, how is it that we keep these ideas of the universe straight chapter to chapter? It was very much the reverse, where we knew exactly how the universe operated, right? Not the laws of physics per se, but the laws of how everything works there. And then finding the story within that universe was the easy part.
Wow. That's, I have to take my hat off to both of you. I think it's amazing to be able to create a world out of just a tiny little idea, this idea that in Western Pennsylvania, every February they pull a groundhog out of the dirt and hold it up, see its shadow. I don't even know what happens if you see its shadow, but it's really incredible. Rob, is this? I know that you shared that neither one of you thought of writing a book. Now that the book is here and you have all these possibilities, are you both looking forward to creating additional stories in this universe?
Yeah, like Andrew said, we built out a pretty sort of comprehensive universe with its own history and its own rules. And we kind of have been working on that all along because we always imagined this would be bigger than one book. And so we're planning to do 4 books in this series, 1 for each of the seasons. We've already started outlining book 2. But in the meantime, we've already written a spin-off book with one of the and it's a children's picture book with one of the characters named Hugo, who's a flamingo, and he goes back to the Everglades to find his family. And that book is obviously more Florida-centric, and our goal is to partner with some environmental groups here locally to promote that one and capture a younger audience, like the group of kids that would be just younger than the group that the Great Weather Diviner's for. And we hope to do more spin-offs and stuff like that as well. And so we think we've built a big enough, rich enough universe that we could have a lot of fun with it. And I think that the important part is it ties back to real world things. There's a lot of metaphors, and we literally have a glossary at the end of The Great Weather Diviner that talks about all the real life animals that are portrayed in the book that are endangered or extinct in real life from climate change. And so we try to make sure everything we do has a message. And we think there's a lot of education that we can get out there to kids, but in the form of really great storytelling, and so that idea excites us. So I don't think there's going to be any shortage of opportunities to tell stories, as long as people buy them and like them, we'll probably keep writing them.
Andrew, one of the things that we've done here on the podcast is we've had a number of episodes that talk about climate change and talk to parents about how they can address the issue of climate change with their kids without terrifying them. What's the thing that you are most passionate about around the whole climate change issue? What is it that you want mostly for kids to hear and take away from the Great Weather Diviner?
Finding a way to talk about climate change in a way that's accessible to children is the entire background of this book. It is the goal that we hope to accomplish. And so we've given that a lot of thought. What we wanted to do was create a story that was going to be fun, exciting, action-packed, feel like a fantasy epic, but also have that metaphor of what we need to do to protect our environment. And so a middle grade child, which is our main audience that reads this, they're going to love the story. And in the same vein as a Pixar movie, let's say, there's a deeper message that the parents and adults will understand explicitly, even if the children just kind of get the idea of it. And so what we did is there are a couple of natural disasters, not to give away any spoilers, but a couple of natural disasters in our story that are the center of the plot as the characters move through. And it's because of those natural disasters that our main character, obviously a groundhog, but also his friends, a hedgehog and a raccoon, realize there's something wrong with nature. These natural disasters didn't happen in a bubble. We have not taken care enough of the environment, and that's what's led to this situation. And so that's kind of the through line through this story. But we also have, as Rob mentioned, a few endangered species. we have a place in the book where animals go when their environment, their home has been destroyed. And through that method, we talk about the ways that the world is changing and that we need to think about the animals that are affected when we as humans do things like deforestation. Now, there's no humans in our story. And so it's a lot of animals that deal with nature in different ways and interact with the forest and the lakes and rivers in our story that contribute to a lot of these environmental factors. Our hope is that a child who reads this story is going to then go back and no, they're not going to change climate change overnight, but maybe they'll be inspired to conserve a little bit more water or recycle more, maybe do a classroom project that is about environmentalism. And in that way, we hope that our book inspires young people to think more about how to save the planet.
Inspiration. Rob, you were inspired in some ways to write this book by growing up in Punxsutawney. I'm curious, what are your old neighbors saying about this untold story?
So it's a lot of support so far. It's funny enough, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, we were featured on the front page of the local paper, the Punxsutawney Spirit, because I interviewed with a reporter there, and they had a whole write-up on the book, big picture of me on the front. And it happened to be the week before my 20-year class reunion, which was the following weekend. I think a lot of people flew. I couldn't make it, but a lot of people flew in for that. So I was getting a lot of texts and calls like, "Hey man, you made the front page of the Punxsy Spirit, dream come true." Which we're joking. It's a very small paper, but it was pretty cool. I got a lot of really positive feedback from that, and I think it led to a lot of pre-orders of the book, I'm hoping. But yeah, so far it's been a very positive reception, and I think it's because our book really is, it's a reimagined version of this, but it's really an homage to the tradition of Punxsutawney and the groundhog that they created in a way. It doesn't belittle it or try and change it. It's kind of its own thing, but it pays tribute to something that they've created. And that was ultimately kind of, I think the goal when we first started this is I always thought like this was a fun little thing that we do in Punxsutawney, but how do we bring this to a wider audience? How do we turn this sort of piece of what is really public domain, it's been around for so long, into a really interesting IP, something that we could work with and make characters that engage with young kids and that are relatable, and that was really the goal. And I think it's working. I think it's going to work.
Yeah. Andrew, you were telling me before we started recording that you and Rob are big Disney fans, and you're real excited there's going to be a train running from Miami to Orlando, so you're going to be able to get there like in no time and have all this energy because you're not going to have to drive. Is there a dream that Disney or Universal or Pixar or some studio is going to pick up The Great Weather Diviner and turn it into a major motion picture and perhaps a franchise?
That is, of course, a dream of ours. We really think this is not only a fun story, but it's very visual. We do a good job of describing what the environment looks like in this world of Erda and describing our characters, who are all different animals. But we think that there's a visual language here that can really be picked up if this is turned into a TV show or a movie. But you mentioned going to Orlando and going to the theme parks. We already have plans for a Great Weather Diviner theme park. That is in the works from Rob and I, in the fantasy world of our heads. But in the more realistic sense, we do hope that this turns into a movie or a TV show because it's one of those stories that everyone's going to enjoy. I could, if I was scrolling through Disney Plus or Netflix or Paramount Plus, I could see this cover being on the screen and wanting to click on it because it seems like an interesting story for both children and adults. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, for me, a lot of this was about nostalgia. I still love reading young adult fiction and even middle grade fiction because it elicits emotions that a lot of books written for adults don't bring. Mm-hmm. And I think that our generation, millennials especially, love that sense of nostalgia, which is why I think that this as a book and as a future TV show or movie is really appealing to a wide group of people.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot from authors who are writing in the middle grade space, that they really love it, and I love reading middle grade novels too. They're an awful lot of fun, and if there's any parents out there with young kids who are dreading, oh, my kids are going to be a reader at some point, and they're not going to want to read with me or have me read to them anymore. Don't worry about that, because books like The Great Weather Diviner are great books to continue to read with your kids once they're reading on their own, or co-read. I think that would be a wonderful experience for them. Rob, any possibility of this becoming an audiobook in the near future?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely going to happen. Our publisher has already spoken to us about that. I think there's a certain amount of time that we wait until after it's published, which is in November, because they don't want to cannibalize the written book sales. But then after, I think, a few months, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, Andrew, then we will record the audiobook. And we have to choose whether we want to do it ourselves or have an actor do it. We haven't figured that part out yet. But there will certainly be an audiobook, and we're really excited about that process because I'm a big Audible fan.
Yeah. Well, if I have a vote in it, and I probably don't, I would say I love audiobooks that are read by the authors, especially anytime you hear an emotion. I love it. A friend of mine wrote a book, and he read the book, and I loved it because there were moments in the book as he was reading it that it was obvious that he had forgotten that he had written certain passages. And so you kind of hear his voice go, oh, you just hear that. And that's something I love. I think that's really cool. And so I'd love to hear your version of an audiobook of The Great Weather Diviner. Tell us where we can go to find out more about The Great Weather Diviner, the untold origin of Punxsutawney Phil, and more about both of you.
So The Great Weather Diviner, The Untold Origin of Punxsutawney Phil, will hit stores on November 7th. We're really excited for that to be in bookstores and online nationwide. Right now, you can pre-order the book at Barnes & Noble or wherever you get your books. We also have a website at greatweatherdiviner.com. That's where we have a lot of awesome merch available that features our characters, beautiful art that we had our cover artists do additional pieces so there'll be more about these characters that people can have as t-shirts, sweatshirts, cups, mugs, whatever they want. We also have social media. Wherever you're on social media, you can find us at groundhog book. And like I said, we're looking for the book to get out there. Please go on to Barnes & Noble or wherever you get your books to pre-order it now.
And one last question, Rob, is there a bookstore in Punxsutawney that is going to be carrying The Great Weather Diviner?
Unfortunately, Punxsutawney no longer has a bookstore.
Oh, no.
We had the Book Nook for many years. It was great. It's gone now. There's like a used bookstore there, but it's they don't really have new books, so I don't think we're going to use it. There are a few nearby bookstores that we're looking into. But we haven't lined anything up specifically yet. I know there's like a Barnes & Noble, in, I think, like Greenville or somewhere nearby, like less than an hour away. I think it's the closest Barnes & Noble, and it'll be there for sure. But as far as local bookstores, we got to find some in some surrounding towns, unfortunately, because Punxsutawney, I hope to change that, by the way, but Punxsutawney doesn't have a bookstore right now.
But that said,
there is a gift shop at the Punxsutawney official souvenir shop is going to be selling our books, and we're going to be doing some events with them and with the Punxsutawney Chamber of Commerce, probably the day before or the day after Groundhog's Day. We haven't nailed down those dates yet, but we'll be there.
Now, Andrew, have you guys gotten both your matching big hats that they wear when they pull the groundhog out of the ground?
We have been having long conversations about what we want to wear when we go to Punxsutawney. That is definitely in the mix.
We've had a great time speaking to the authors of The Great Weather Diviner, The Untold Origin of Punxsutawney Phil. Our guests have been the authors, Rob Long and Andrew Dolberg. Hey, my friends, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. We are so grateful that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. We'd love for you to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading with Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. If you are on LinkedIn, please connect with Jed Doherty. We also have a Reading with Your Kids page on LinkedIn. We would love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Authors, click on the Authors Click Here button to find out how you can be a guest here on the show and find out how we can help you celebrate your book with the world. And also, parents, please be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com to download our free online magazine. Hey, we want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our amazing guests. I also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Chris Doherty, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
What?